The alarm clock buzzed at 5:30 a.m. on September 11th, 2001, just as it had every Tuesday for the past 15 years of Michael O'Brien's career with the New York City Fire Department. At 38 years old, he had seen enough tragedy and triumph to understand that every morning could bring something unexpected, but nothing in his experience had prepared him for what this particular Tuesday would demand of him and his fellow firefighters. If you enjoy stories like this, please leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you won't miss any new stories. It really helps us out, and don't forget to leave your comment about the story. Now let's continue. Michael rolled out of bed in the small Queens apartment he shared with his wife, Sarah, and their 3 children, trying not to wake his family as he moved through the familiar routine of getting ready for his shift at Engine Company 54 in Midtown Manhattan. Sarah, a dedicated nurse at Mount Sinai Hospital, had worked a double shift the previous day and was finally getting some much-needed rest. 8-year-old Tommy was sprawled across his twin bed, having kicked off his covers during the night, while 6-year-old Emma slept peacefully clutching her stuffed elephant, and 4-year-old Jake had somehow managed to sleep sideways across his toddler bed. As Michael stood in the doorway of their children's shared bedroom, watching them sleep in the grey, pre-dawn light filtering through the curtains, he felt an unusual weight settling in his chest. It wasn't physical discomfort. His years of maintaining the fitness required for firefighting had kept him in excellent shape, but rather an emotional heaviness that seemed to press down on him like a physical force. He had experienced similar feelings before during his career, usually on days when the job would present particularly dangerous or challenging situations. Over the years, he had learned to pay attention to these instincts, recognizing them as his subconscious mind's way of processing subtle cues and patterns that his conscious awareness hadn't yet identified. Today, that familiar sense of foreboding felt stronger than it ever had before. Michael made his way to the kitchen and started the coffee pot, going through the automatic motions of preparing for another day while his mind remained focused on his family. He found himself studying details he had seen thousands of times before. The crayon drawings held to the refrigerator with magnets, the pile of unpaid bills stacked neatly on the counter next to Sarah's nursing textbooks, the family photo from their vacation to the Jersey Shore the previous summer, where all 5 of them were grinning at the camera with sand-covered feet and sun-kissed faces. The financial pressures of raising 3 children on a firefighter's salary and a nurse's wages were constant but manageable. They had been talking about moving to a larger apartment, maybe even saving enough for a down payment on a small house with a yard where the kids could play. Michael had been working overtime shifts whenever possible, and Sarah had been picking up extra hours at the hospital. Their dreams were modest but achievable. A place where Tommy could have his own room, where Emma could have space for her art projects, where Jake could run around without worrying about disturbing the neighbors below. As he sipped his coffee and watched the sunrise paint the sky in shades of pink and orange, Michael made a mental note to call Sarah during his lunch break and tell her how much he loved her. It seemed important, though he couldn't explain why. They had been married for 10 years, together for 12, and had settled into the comfortable rhythms of a couple who knew each other's habits, dreams, and fears. But this morning, those familiar patterns felt precious in a way that surprised him. When Sarah emerged from the bedroom at 6:45, already dressed in her scrubs and ready for her morning shift, Michael pulled her into an embrace that lasted longer than their usual goodbye hug. "You're being awfully affectionate for this early in the morning," Sarah said with a smile, though she could see something different in his expression. "Everything okay?" "Just thinking about how lucky I am," Michael replied, kissing her forehead gently. "How lucky we are. Sometimes I look around at what we've built together, and I can't believe it's all real." Sarah studied his face with the perceptive gaze of someone who had spent 10 years learning to read his moods and emotions. "You're worried about something. What is it?" Michael shook his head, not wanting to burden her with feelings he couldn't explain or justify. Not worried, just grateful. Sometimes I get these moments where I realize how much I have to lose, you know. It makes me want to hold on to it all a little tighter. They spent a few more minutes talking about their plans for the evening. Sarah would pick up the kids from school and daycare, Michael would hopefully be home by 6 for dinner, and they were all going to work on the family Halloween costumes that the children had been planning for weeks. Tommy wanted to be a firefighter like his dad. Emma had chosen to be a princess with a stethoscope so she could be a doctor like she wanted to be when she grew up. And Jake had declared his intention to be a dinosaur, though he changed his mind about which kind of dinosaur several times each day. After Sarah left for work and the children were awake and getting ready for school, Michael found himself paying unusually close attention to their morning routines. He watched Emma carefully braid her doll's hair while eating breakfast, listened to Tommy practice his multiplication tables one more time before his test, and helped Jake pick out clothes that he deemed appropriate for a 4-year-old who took his fashion choices very seriously. "Dad, you're staring again," Emma observed as she finished her cereal and wiped her mouth with the napkin he had given her. "Are you sure you're not worried about something?" "I'm just proud of you guys," Michael said, ruffling her hair affectionately. "Sometimes dads need to take a good look at their kids and remember how awesome they are." Tommy looked up from his backpack, which he was organizing with the methodical precision of someone who took his responsibilities seriously. "Mom says you save people at work. Do you ever get scared?" The question caught Michael off guard, both because of its directness and because of the genuine curiosity in his son's 8-year-old eyes. "Sometimes," he answered honestly. "Being scared isn't a bad thing, Tommy. It means you understand that something is dangerous or important. The trick is not letting the scared feeling stop you from doing what needs to be done." "Like when Emma was afraid to ride her bike without training wheels, but she did it anyway?" Tommy asked. "Exactly like that," Michael confirmed, glancing at Emma, who beamed with pride at being included in the conversation about bravery. After dropping the children at their respective schools and daycare, Michael drove through the familiar streets of Queens toward Manhattan, using the time stuck in morning traffic to think about the conversation with Tommy. His son's question about fear had resonated with him more than he expected. The truth was that fear had been his constant companion throughout his career with the FDNY, but it was a different kind of fear than most people experienced. It wasn't fear for his own safety that kept him awake some nights, though he was certainly aware of the risks inherent in his profession. It was fear for the people he might not be able to save, fear that he might make a mistake that cost someone their life, fear that he might leave Sarah and the children without a husband and father. These fears had motivated him to train harder, study more, and push himself to be the best firefighter he could possibly be. As he crossed the Queensboro Bridge and caught sight of the Manhattan skyline, Michael felt that familiar heaviness in his chest intensify. The twin towers of the World Trade Center stood tall and imposing against the crystal-clear September sky, and he found himself looking at them with an intensity that surprised him. He had been in those buildings several times over the years for various fire department training exercises and special events, and he had always been impressed by their engineering and the bustling energy of the thousands of people who worked there every day. Engine Company 54's firehouse on 8th Avenue was buzzing with its usual morning activity when Michael arrived. His colleagues were going through their routine equipment checks, reviewing the previous night's incident reports, and engaging in the good-natured conversation and gentle ribbing that helped maintain morale in a profession that regularly exposed them to human tragedy and danger. Captain Rodriguez was at his desk reviewing paperwork when Michael checked in, and Lieutenant Thompson was conducting the daily inspection of the engine's equipment with the thoroughness that had made him one of the most respected officers in the department. The other firefighters, Martinez, Johnson, Kelly, and Washington, were settling into what they hoped would be a relatively quiet Tuesday shift. "You look like you're carrying the weight of the world this morning, O'Brien," observed Firefighter Martinez, as Michael hung up his civilian clothes in his locker and began putting on his turnout gear. Sarah finally realized she married beneath her station. The joke was familiar and affectionate, part of the ongoing banter that helped them cope with the stress and uncertainty of their work. Michael managed to smile, but his heart wasn't in the usual back and forth. "Just one of those mornings," he replied, though he continued to feel as though he were moving through the world from behind a sheet of glass. "You've been having a lot of those mornings lately," Lieutenant Thompson observed, approaching with the kind of concerned expression that experienced officers developed when they noticed changes in their crew's behavior. "Everything okay at home?" Michael appreciated the question and the genuine concern behind it. The fire department was more than just a workplace. It was a family, and the men he worked with had earned the right to worry about each other's well-being. "Home's great," he assured Thompson. "Sarah and the kids are perfect. It's just, I don't know. Have you ever had days where everything feels more important than usual? Like you're seeing things more clearly, but that clarity makes you realize how much you have to lose?" Thompson nodded slowly. 22 years on the job, and I still get those feelings sometimes. Usually means something big is coming. Could be good, could be bad, but definitely big. Trust your instincts, O'Brien. They've kept you alive this long. The first alarm of the day came at 8:46 a.m., and it was unlike anything any of them had experienced in their combined decades of firefighting service. The dispatcher's voice crackled over the intercom with an urgency that immediately commanded everyone's attention. "Engine Company 54, Ladder 4, Battalion 9, respond to World Trade Center Tower 1 for a reported aircraft incident. Multiple units responding. Use extreme caution. Reports indicate a commercial airliner has impacted upper floors." The firefighters looked at each other with expressions of confusion and disbelief. Aircraft incidents in Manhattan were extraordinarily rare, and the idea of a commercial airliner striking one of the Twin Towers seemed almost impossible to comprehend. Their initial assumption was that a small private plane had somehow gotten off course and struck the building, perhaps due to mechanical failure, pilot error, or freak weather conditions. As Engine Company 54 raced through the streets of Manhattan, with sirens wailing and emergency lights flashing, Michael found himself thinking about Sarah and the children with an intensity that bordered on desperation. The feeling of foreboding that had been with him all morning suddenly crystallized into something approaching certainty that this call would be fundamentally different from any other they had responded to in their careers. The scene that greeted them when they arrived at the World Trade Center complex defied comprehension. The North Tower was burning from approximately the 90th floor upward, with massive flames and billowing black smoke pouring from a gaping wound in the building's side that was far too large to have been caused by a small aircraft. Debris was raining down from the upper floors, forcing civilians and first responders to take cover as they tried to understand what had happened and how to respond. Captain Rodriguez quickly began coordinating with the battalion chief and the commanders from other companies that were arriving on scene. The initial plan was to establish a command post in the lobby of the North Tower and begin the complex process of evacuating civilians from the lower floors, while simultaneously attempting to reach the fire floors to conduct search and rescue operations. As they prepared to enter the building, Michael felt his cell phone vibrate in his pocket. He had purchased the device only a few months earlier at Sarah's insistence so they could stay in contact during emergencies or unexpected schedule changes. The technology was still relatively new and not entirely reliable, but it had already proven useful on several occasions when his shift had been extended or when he needed to coordinate pickup times for the children. When he pulled out the phone, he saw that he had no signal, which was not uncommon in the dense urban environment of lower Manhattan, especially during major incidents when the cellular networks could become overloaded. However, he noticed that he could still access his voicemail system through the phone's menu, and he realized that this might be his only opportunity to leave a message for Sarah before entering what was clearly going to be an extremely dangerous and unpredictable situation. Without fully understanding why, Michael felt compelled to record a message that would be more comprehensive than his usual quick check-in calls. The feeling of foreboding that had been with him all morning had evolved into something approaching certainty that he needed to communicate specific information to Sarah, not just reassurance and expressions of love. He stepped slightly away from his colleagues, who were busy preparing equipment and reviewing building plans, and dialed Sarah's voicemail at Mount Sinai Hospital. When her cheerful recorded greeting finished playing, he began to speak, choosing his words carefully despite the chaos and urgency of the situation unfolding around him. "Sarah, it's me, and I need you to listen to this whole message," he began, his voice steady and purposeful. "I'm at the World Trade Center, and something really bad has happened here. I don't know if I'm going to make it home tonight, so there are some things I need to tell you while I still can." Michael paused for a moment, watching his colleagues preparing to enter the tower, then continued. "First, and most important, I love you more than I've ever loved anything in my life. You and Tommy and Emma and Jake are everything to me. If something happens to me today, I need you to know that every single day we've had together has been worth whatever comes next." The message continued for several more minutes, with Michael providing Sarah with specific information about their financial accounts, insurance policies, and important documents. But embedded within those practical details were what would later prove to be crucial warnings and instructions that seemed to come from an almost supernatural understanding of the challenges Sarah would face in the months and years following this day. "There's one more thing," Michael said, as he watched Captain Rodriguez signaling for the company to prepare for entry. "My brother Danny is going to try to convince you to sell the apartment and move back to Boston to be near his family. Don't do it, Sarah. The kids need to stay in their schools, and you need to stay close to your job at the hospital. Danny means well, but he's never understood what we've built here in New York." Michael also mentioned several other people by name, providing Sarah with guidance about who she could trust and who might try to take advantage of her situation as a widow with 3 young children. At the time, these warnings seemed like the paranoid concerns of a man facing possible death, but they would later prove to be remarkably prescient insights into human nature and the ways that tragedy can bring out both the best and worst in people. "I have to go now," Michael concluded, his voice growing more urgent as Captain Rodriguez called for the company to move out. "Kiss the kids for me every day and tell them that their dad was proud to be a firefighter and proud to be their father. I'll love you forever, Sarah. Take care of each other." Michael ended the call and rejoined his company as they entered the North Tower of the World Trade Center. The lobby was filled with civilians evacuating from the upper floors, many of them injured and all of them terrified by what they had experienced. The firefighters immediately began assisting with the evacuation, while also preparing to climb the stairs to reach the floors where people were trapped above the impact zone. What happened next would become part of the tragic history of September 11th, 2001. Engine Company 54 climbed the stairs of the North Tower along with hundreds of other first responders, carrying equipment and hope in equal measure as they raced against time to save as many people as possible. Michael O'Brien was last seen on the 35th floor, helping evacuate a group of office workers who had been struggling to navigate the smoke-filled stairwell. When the North Tower collapsed at 10:28 a.m., Michael and 5 of his colleagues from Engine Company 54 were inside the building. Their bodies were recovered weeks later from the rubble, and they were posthumously honored for their sacrifice and heroism. Michael's funeral was attended by hundreds of firefighters from across the country, and his name was added to the memorial that would eventually be built to honor all those who died on that terrible day. But the story of Michael O'Brien's final message was just beginning. Sarah had been working her shift at Mount Sinai Hospital when the first reports of the attacks began filtering through the hospital's communication systems. Like most New Yorkers that day, she initially struggled to comprehend the magnitude of what was happening. Her first thought was concern for Michael's safety, knowing that the FDNY would be responding to whatever had occurred at the World Trade Center. She tried calling his cell phone repeatedly throughout the morning, but all of her calls went straight to voicemail. It wasn't until early afternoon, when the scope of the attacks had become clear and the casualty reports were beginning to emerge, that she thought to check her own voicemail messages. When she heard Michael's voice on that recording, speaking to her with such clarity and purpose while the worst terrorist attack in American history unfolded around him, Sarah initially focused on the emotional content of his message. The practical information he had provided seemed secondary to the profound expression of love and the heartbreaking realization that he had somehow known he was saying goodbye forever. In the days and weeks that followed, as Sarah struggled to cope with her grief while also managing the practical challenges of suddenly becoming a single mother to 3 young children, Michael's message provided comfort and guidance. The financial information he had provided proved invaluable in navigating the complex process of accessing insurance benefits and survivor payments. His expressions of love became a source of strength when the weight of her loss seemed unbearable. But it wasn't until nearly 2 years after Michael's death that Sarah began to understand the full significance of his final message. The warnings and advice he had embedded within his words of love proved to be remarkably accurate predictions of the challenges she would face and the people who would try to influence her decisions during her most vulnerable period. Michael's brother Danny had indeed tried to convince Sarah to sell the apartment and move to Boston, arguing that she needed family support to raise 3 children alone. When she politely declined, following Michael's advice to keep the children in their familiar schools and maintain her position at the hospital, Danny became increasingly insistent and eventually accusatory, suggesting that Sarah was being selfish and stubborn. Other predictions from Michael's message proved equally accurate. A family friend who had offered to help manage Sarah's finances turned out to have serious financial problems of his own and had been hoping to borrow against the life insurance settlement. A neighbor who had seemed especially helpful and supportive in the immediate aftermath of Michael's death eventually revealed that his interest was romantic rather than purely altruistic, and he became increasingly persistent in his advances despite Sarah's clear lack of interest. Most disturbing of all was the situation involving Sarah's father-in-law, Michael's father, Patrick, who had initially seemed supportive and helpful, but gradually began suggesting that Sarah was not capable of raising 3 children without a male influence in the household. Patrick, who had never fully approved of his son's marriage to Sarah, began making increasingly pointed comments about the children's need for proper guidance, and eventually consulted with a lawyer about the possibility of seeking custody or at least significant visitation rights. In each of these situations, Sarah found herself remembering specific warnings from Michael's message, guidance that helped her navigate complex emotional and legal challenges with greater wisdom and confidence than she might have possessed otherwise. It was as though Michael had somehow seen into the future and understood exactly what kinds of pressures and manipulations she would face as a widow with young children and significant financial resources. The most significant revelation came when Sarah was reviewing financial documents in preparation for the 2nd anniversary of Michael's death. Hidden among the insurance papers and bank statements, she found a sealed envelope marked "For Sarah," open on September 11, 2003, in Michael's handwriting. Inside the envelope was a letter dated September 10th, 2001, the day before the attacks. The letter revealed that Michael had been experiencing increasingly vivid dreams and waking premonitions about his own death for several weeks before September 11th. He wrote about feeling compelled to organize their financial affairs, update his will, and record detailed instructions for Sarah about how to handle various situations that might arise after his death. "I don't know if I'm losing my mind or if something is really going to happen," Michael had written, "but I can't shake the feeling that I need to prepare you for things I won't be here to help you handle. I've been having dreams about you having to make difficult decisions while you're grieving, and I keep seeing specific people who will try to take advantage of your situation or convince you to do things that aren't in your best interest." The letter went on to provide even more detailed guidance about financial management, child-rearing decisions, and relationship boundaries than he had been able to include in his voicemail message. It also revealed the depth of his love and his anguish at the thought of leaving his family to face life's challenges without him. "If you're reading this, then my worst fears have come true," the letter concluded. "But I also hope that my preparations will help you and the kids build a good life together. Trust your instincts, trust the love we shared, and don't let anyone convince you that you're not strong enough to handle whatever comes next. You are the strongest person I've ever known, and our children are lucky to have you as their mother." Sarah sat at her kitchen table, reading and rereading Michael's letter as she tried to process the implications of what he had somehow known or sensed about the future. The practical value of his guidance was undeniable. His warnings and advice had helped her avoid financial exploitation, maintain appropriate boundaries with people who had questionable motives, and make decisions that prioritized her children's well-being over other people's expectations or demands. But beyond the practical benefits, Sarah began to understand that Michael's final message and letter represented something much more profound than simple preparation or planning. They were evidence of a love so deep and protective that it had somehow transcended the normal limitations of time and knowledge, allowing him to provide guidance and support even after his death. Over the following months, Sarah found herself returning to Michael's message and letter whenever she faced difficult decisions or challenging situations. His voice on that recording became a source of strength and wisdom that helped her navigate the complexities of raising 3 children alone, while also honoring his memory and the values they had shared. Tommy, Emma, and Jake grew up with the story of their father's final message, understanding it as evidence of how much he had loved them and their mother. Tommy, in particular, was deeply affected by learning about his father's premonitions and preparations, and he began to understand that true love involves not just emotional expression, but also practical concern for the people you care about most. As the children reached adolescence and young adulthood, they came to appreciate the profound gift their father had given their family through his final message. His warnings about people who might try to manipulate or exploit their mother had helped preserve the family's financial security and emotional stability during their most vulnerable years. His expressions of love and pride had provided them with a sense of identity and self-worth that sustained them through the challenges of growing up without their father. Emma, who became a nurse like her mother, often spoke about how her father's message had demonstrated the importance of clear communication and advanced planning in caring for the people you love. Jake, who chose to become a teacher, was inspired by his father's ability to provide guidance and protection even in his absence. But it was Tommy who was most profoundly affected by his father's legacy. Following in Michael's footsteps, he joined the FDNY after college and became a firefighter himself. During his training, he often thought about his father's final message and the way love and duty had motivated him to think beyond his own safety, to consider how his actions and words might continue to protect and guide his family even after his death. The story of Michael O'Brien's final message eventually became part of the oral tradition of the New York City Fire Department, shared among firefighters as an example of the kind of love and foresight that could help families survive the loss of a first responder. It was also featured in several books and documentaries about September 11th, though Sarah was careful to maintain her family's privacy while also honoring Michael's memory and the lessons his story could provide to others. On every anniversary of September 11th, Sarah and her children would gather to listen to Michael's message together, using it as an opportunity to remember him and to reflect on how his love had continued to guide and protect them over the years. The message that had once seemed like a simple goodbye had revealed itself to be something much more significant, a testament to the power of love to transcend death and provide guidance across time. Dr. Rebecca Martinez, a psychiatrist who specializes in grief and trauma recovery, studied Sarah's case as part of her research into how families cope with the sudden loss of a parent. She was particularly interested in the role that Michael's message and letter had played in helping Sarah avoid many of the common pitfalls that widows with young children often encounter. What makes Sarah's story so remarkable, Dr. Martinez explained in her published research, is not just that her husband seemed to anticipate specific challenges she would face, but that his guidance was so perfectly calibrated to help her maintain her autonomy and decision-making authority during a time when she was most vulnerable to manipulation and poor choices. Dr. Martinez noted that widows, particularly those with significant financial resources and young children, often become targets for various forms of exploitation and manipulation. Well-meaning family members may try to assume control over major decisions. Supposed friends may attempt to take advantage of emotional vulnerability, and unscrupulous individuals may seek access to insurance settlements or other assets. Michael's message provided Sarah with a kind of emotional and practical armor, Dr. Martinez observed. His specific warnings about particular individuals and situations helped her recognize manipulation when it occurred, while his expressions of confidence in her abilities reinforced her sense of agency and self-worth. The combination was extraordinarily effective in helping her navigate an extremely challenging period. The case also attracted attention from researchers who study premonitions and intuitive knowledge. Dr. James Sullivan, a psychologist who investigates reported instances of precognitive experiences, interviewed Sarah extensively about Michael's apparent foreknowledge of future events. While we can't definitively prove that Michael had supernatural knowledge of future events, Dr. Sullivan explained, his message and letter demonstrate a level of insight into human nature and family dynamics that goes far beyond normal planning or preparation. Whether you attribute this to intuition, spiritual guidance, or simply exceptional emotional intelligence, the practical results speak for themselves. Dr. Sullivan noted that first responders, particularly those in high-risk professions like firefighting, often develop heightened awareness of danger and mortality that can manifest as unusually detailed preparation for worst-case scenarios. However, the specificity of Michael's warnings and the accuracy of his predictions about particular individuals and situations suggested something beyond normal professional caution. Sarah herself remained thoughtful but reserved about the supernatural aspects of her husband's message. "I don't know if Michael had some kind of special knowledge about what was going to happen," she said in one of the few interviews she granted about her experience. "What I know is that he loved us enough to think carefully about what we would need if he wasn't here to take care of us anymore. That love and the practical wisdom that came with it made all the difference in helping us build a good life together." As Tommy progressed through his career with the FDNY, he found himself thinking often about the legacy of his father's message and the lessons it contained about love, duty, and preparation. He began encouraging his colleagues to have similar conversations with their own families, not because he believed they would have supernatural premonitions, but because he understood the value of clear communication and advanced planning in protecting the people they loved most. "The job we do is dangerous," Tommy would tell newer firefighters during informal mentoring sessions. "We can't control whether we make it home at the end of our shift, but we can control how well we prepare our families for the possibility that we might not. That preparation is part of loving them, part of taking care of them even when we can't be there physically." Tommy's approach to family preparation was practical rather than mystical, but it was deeply informed by his understanding of how his father's message had provided protection and guidance during his family's most difficult period. He encouraged his colleagues to organize their financial affairs, communicate clearly about their values and expectations, and provide their spouses with specific guidance about decision-making and relationship boundaries. Emma, who had become a pediatric nurse specializing in trauma recovery, often drew on her family's experience when counseling families who had lost a parent in accidents or violent incidents. She understood from personal experience how practical preparation could ease the burden of grief and how clear expressions of love could provide ongoing comfort and strength. "One of the things that helped us the most," Emma would tell families she counseled, "was knowing exactly how our father felt about us and having his guidance about important decisions we might have to make. That knowledge didn't take away the pain of losing him, but it gave us a foundation to build on as we learned how to live without him." Emma was careful not to suggest that all families should expect supernatural guidance or premonitions, but she emphasized the importance of clear communication about love, values, and practical concerns. She had seen too many families struggle with uncertainty about their deceased parents' wishes or feelings, and she understood how that uncertainty could complicate the already difficult process of grief and adjustment. Jake, who had become a high school guidance counselor, often shared his father's story with students who were dealing with the loss of a parent or other family member. He focused on the message's demonstration of enduring love and the ways that people we care about can continue to influence and guide us even after they're gone. "My dad died when I was 4 years old," Jake would tell his students, "but his love and his values have been part of my life every day since then." The message he left for our family became like a roadmap that helped us make good decisions and stay connected to each other. That's what love does. It doesn't end when someone dies. It keeps working, keeps protecting, keeps guiding us if we pay attention to it. Jake's approach resonated particularly well with teenagers, who were often struggling with questions about identity, relationships, and future planning. His personal story provided them with a concrete example of how family love and values could provide stability and direction during uncertain times. 20 years after September 11th, 2001, Sarah O'Brien gathered with her adult children and their families to commemorate the anniversary of Michael's death and to listen once again to his final message. The tradition had evolved over the years to include Tommy's wife and 2 young daughters, Emma's husband and infant son, and Jake's fiancée. But the core purpose remained the same: to remember Michael and to reflect on how his love had continued to shape and protect their family. As they sat in the living room of the house Sarah had eventually been able to buy with the life insurance settlement, following Michael's advice to invest in real estate rather than keeping all their assets in savings accounts, they listened to his voice, speaking across 2 decades with the same clarity and purpose he had shown on that terrible morning. "Every time I hear this message," Tommy said after the recording ended, "I'm amazed by how much thought he put into it under such incredible pressure. He was facing the unknown, but he used his last opportunity to communicate with us to provide exactly what we would need to thrive without him." Emma nodded, holding her infant son closer as she thought about the courage it must have taken for Michael to focus on his family's future rather than his own fear. It's like he knew that his job that day wasn't just to save the people in that building, but also to save us from all the things that might go wrong after he was gone. Jake, now in his mid-20s and preparing for his own wedding, reflected on how his father's message had shaped his understanding of love and commitment. When I think about the promises I'm going to make to my future wife, I think about Dad's message and how love means thinking about what the other person will need, not just what you want to say. Sarah, now in her late 50s, looked around at her children and their growing families with the satisfaction of knowing that Michael's sacrifice and preparation had achieved exactly what he had intended. The family he had fought to protect on September 11th had not just survived his loss, they had thrived, guided by his wisdom and strengthened by his love. Your father's message taught us that love isn't just a feeling, Sarah said, addressing both her children and the newer members of their extended family. It's a responsibility. It's thinking ahead, planning carefully, and making sure the people you care about have what they need to succeed, even when you can't be there to help them directly. Sarah's granddaughter, Tommy's eldest daughter, who was now 7 years old, listened with the solemn attention that children often bring to family stories they don't fully understand but recognize as important. "Grandpa was a hero, right?" she asked, using the title the grandchildren had adopted for the grandfather they had never met. "He was," Sarah confirmed, "but not just because he was brave at work. He was a hero because he loved us enough to think about what we would need long after he was gone. That's what heroes do. They protect people even when it's hard, even when they're scared, even when they don't know what's going to happen next." The annual listening tradition had become more than just a way to remember Michael. It had evolved into a teaching moment about the nature of love, sacrifice, and family responsibility. Each year, as the children grew older and their understanding deepened, they discovered new layers of meaning in their father's words and new applications for the wisdom he had shared. Dr. Patricia Hennessy, a researcher who studies the long-term effects of traumatic loss on families, had followed the O'Brien family's story for over a decade as part of her work on resilience and recovery. She was particularly interested in how Michael's message had functioned as what psychologists call a continuing bond, an ongoing connection between the deceased and the surviving family members that provides comfort, guidance, and a sense of ongoing relationship. Most families who lose a parent in traumatic circumstances struggle with uncertainty about the deceased's feelings and wishes, Dr. Hennessy explained in her published research. They may wonder if their loved one was proud of them, whether they would approve of certain decisions, or how they would want the family to handle specific challenges. Michael's message eliminated that uncertainty for his family, providing them with clear guidance and unambiguous expressions of love that could be accessed whenever they needed reassurance or direction. Dr. Hennessy noted that the specificity of Michael's warnings and advice had been particularly valuable in helping the family avoid common pitfalls that often complicate the grief process. When well-meaning relatives or friends offer advice that conflicts with what they know their father would have wanted, the O'Brien family had a clear reference point for making decisions. This reduced family conflict and helped them maintain unity during a very difficult period. The research also revealed that families who have clear guidance from deceased parents tend to experience less anxiety about major decisions and report higher levels of confidence in their ability to honor their loved one's memory through their choices. Michael's message gave his family permission to trust their own judgment, while also providing them with specific parameters for decision-making, Dr. Hennessy observed. As Tommy advanced in his career with the FDNY, eventually reaching the rank of lieutenant, he began incorporating lessons from his father's story into the training programs for new firefighters. He developed a workshop called Legacy Planning for First Responders that encouraged firefighters to think beyond traditional estate planning to consider the emotional and practical guidance their families would need in the event of their death. My father's message saved our family in ways that went far beyond the financial information he provided, Tommy would tell the firefighters in his workshops. His warnings about specific people and situations helped my mother avoid exploitation and manipulation during the most vulnerable period of her life. His expressions of confidence in her abilities helped her believe in herself when everything felt uncertain. The workshop covered practical topics like organizing financial records, updating wills and insurance policies, and creating clear instructions for accessing important accounts and documents. But it also addressed more subtle concerns, like helping spouses recognize and resist manipulation, maintaining appropriate boundaries with extended family members, and making decisions that prioritize children's stability over other people's expectations. The goal isn't to control your family's decisions from beyond the grave, Tommy would emphasize. The goal is to provide them with the tools and information they need to make good decisions for themselves. Your job is to prepare them for success, not to dictate every choice they'll ever make. The workshops became extremely popular within the FDNY and were eventually adopted by fire departments across the country. Tommy received hundreds of letters from firefighters who had used his father's example to improve their own family preparation and communication. Many reported that the process of creating detailed guidance for their spouses had actually strengthened their marriages by encouraging deeper conversations about values, priorities, and long-term goals. Emma's work as a pediatric trauma nurse was also influenced by her family's experience with sudden loss and recovery. She had observed that children who lose parents in traumatic circumstances often struggle with questions about whether their deceased parent would be proud of their achievements or would approve of their choices. Emma developed a therapeutic approach that helped families create legacy conversations before deployments, surgeries, or other high-risk situations. Children need to know not just that their parents love them, but specifically what their parents see as their strengths, what values they hope their children will embrace, and what dreams they have for their children's futures. Emma explained in her presentations to pediatric healthcare conferences. When parents take the time to articulate these things clearly, it provides children with a foundation for identity and self-worth that can survive even the most traumatic losses. Emma's approach involved helping parents record video messages for their children that could be saved for specific milestones, like graduations, weddings, or the birth of grandchildren. She also encouraged parents to write letters addressing common challenges that children might face, such as peer pressure, academic difficulties, or relationship problems. The idea isn't to solve all of your children's future problems, Emma would explain, but to give them access to your perspective and wisdom when they're facing difficult decisions. Sometimes, just knowing what your parent would think about a situation can provide the clarity and confidence needed to make good choices. Jake's experience as a guidance counselor had shown him how many teenagers struggled with identity and decision-making issues that stemmed from unclear or complicated relationships with their parents. His father's message had provided him with a clear sense of his father's expectations, values, and hopes for his future, which had helped him navigate the typical challenges of adolescence with greater confidence and stability. Students often tell me they don't know what their parents really think about them or what their parents actually want for their lives, Jake observed. They may hear criticism or nagging about grades and behavior, but they rarely hear the deeper messages about love, pride, and long-term dreams. That lack of clarity can make it very difficult for young people to develop a strong sense of identity and purpose. Jake incorporated his father's example into his counseling approach by encouraging students to have explicit conversations with their parents about values, expectations, and aspirations. He also worked with parents to help them communicate more effectively with their teenagers about important topics beyond academics and behavior. Your children need to know not just what you expect from them, but why those expectations matter to you. Jake would tell parents during workshops and individual consultations. They need to understand the values behind your rules and the dreams behind your pressure. When young people understand the bigger picture of what their parents want for them, they're much more likely to make choices that align with those goals. The ripple effects of Michael O'Brien's final message continued to expand as his children applied the lessons they had learned to their own professional and personal relationships. The story became a case study in multiple academic disciplines, from psychology and social work to communications and emergency management. Professor Maria Santos at Columbia University's School of Social Work used the O'Brien family's experience as part of her curriculum on crisis intervention and family resilience. Her students studied how Michael's message had functioned as a form of anticipatory guidance that helped his family navigate predictable challenges and avoid common mistakes. What makes this case so instructive, Professor Santos explained to her graduate students, is how specifically targeted the guidance was. Michael didn't just express general love and confidence in his family. He provided warnings about particular individuals who might try to exploit their vulnerability, advice about specific decisions they would need to make, and reassurance about capabilities they might doubt during their grief process. Professor Santos noted that the effectiveness of Michael's guidance demonstrated the importance of understanding family systems and human psychology when providing crisis preparation. Michael clearly understood that his wife would face pressure from multiple directions after his death, and he took the time to address each of those pressure points specifically. That level of thoughtful preparation is what made his guidance so effective. The case study also highlighted the importance of timing and delivery in crisis communication. Michael had chosen to record his message during the initial response to the World Trade Center attacks, when he had only minutes to communicate what might be his final words to his family. The fact that he used that precious time to provide both emotional support and practical guidance demonstrated exceptional clarity of thought under extreme pressure. Dr. Richard Thompson at Georgetown University's Emergency Management Program used Michael's message as an example of effective crisis communication in his courses on disaster preparedness and family emergency planning. He emphasized how Michael had managed to address both immediate emotional needs and long-term practical concerns in a single, coherent communication. Most people, when faced with what they believe might be their final opportunity to communicate with loved ones, focus exclusively on emotional expression, Dr. Thompson observed. Michael's message demonstrates the value of thinking systematically about what information will be most useful to your family over time. His approach provides a model for how to communicate effectively during crisis situations, when time and opportunities are extremely limited. Dr. Thompson's research into family emergency preparedness had revealed that most families focused on supplies, evacuation routes, and contact information when developing emergency plans, but rarely considered the psychological and social challenges that survivors might face after a traumatic loss. Michael's message illustrated how thoughtful preparation could address these often overlooked aspects of disaster recovery. 25 years after September 11th, the O'Brien family's story had become part of the permanent collection at the National September 11th Memorial and Museum in New York City. Sarah had donated a copy of Michael's message, along with his letter and other personal documents, to help visitors understand the human impact of the attacks and the ways that love and preparation could help families survive even the most devastating losses. The exhibit featuring Michael's story was designed to be interactive, allowing visitors to hear excerpts from his message while reading about how his guidance had helped his family in the years following his death. The display also included updates about his children's careers and achievements, demonstrating the long-term positive outcomes that had resulted from his sacrifice and preparation. Museum director, Dr. Alice Greenwald noted that Michael's story had become one of the most powerful and moving exhibits in the museum. Visitors often spend a long time at this display, she observed. They're struck by the practical wisdom Michael demonstrated under such extreme circumstances, but they're also moved by the evidence of how much he loved his family and how carefully he thought about their future needs. Dr. Greenwald explained that the exhibit served multiple educational purposes beyond simply honoring Michael's memory. This story teaches visitors about the importance of family communication and emergency preparedness, but it also illustrates the kinds of values and priorities that can help people make good decisions during crisis situations. Michael's example shows how love can motivate extraordinary clarity and selflessness even in the most frightening circumstances. The museum exhibit also included audio recordings of interviews with Tommy, Emma, and Jake, now all successful adults with families of their own, discussing how their father's message had influenced their life choices and their approaches to their own family relationships. These testimonials provided visitors with evidence of the long-term positive impact that thoughtful preparation and clear communication could have on family resilience and success. On the morning of September 11, 2026, exactly 25 years after Michael O'Brien left his final message, his family gathered once again for their annual tradition of listening to his words and reflecting on his continuing influence in their lives. The gathering now included not just Sarah and her 3 children, but also their spouses, 5 grandchildren, and several close family friends who had become part of their extended family over the years. As they sat in the living room of Sarah's house in Queens, surrounded by photos spanning 5 decades of family history, they prepared to hear once again the words that had shaped their understanding of love, loss, and resilience. The recording equipment had been updated over the years, but Michael's voice remained as clear and purposeful as it had been on that terrible morning a quarter-century earlier. "Before I play the message," Sarah said, addressing the group that now included grandchildren old enough to understand the full significance of their grandfather's story, "I want you all to remember that what you're about to hear represents only a few minutes from one morning in September 2001. But those few minutes of thoughtfulness and love have guided and protected our family for 25 years. That's the power of choosing your words carefully when the people you love are listening." As Michael's voice filled the room once again, speaking across time with the same clarity and urgency that had characterized that distant morning, the family members listened with the deep attention that comes from years of understanding just how precious and powerful his words had proven to be. The youngest grandchildren, hearing the message for the first time, listened with wide eyes as their grandfather spoke to them from the past, offering guidance and expressing love that had somehow survived his death and continued to influence their family's choices and values. The older family members, who had heard the recording dozens of times over the years, continued to discover new meanings and applications for Michael's wisdom as their own lives evolved and their understanding deepened. When the message ended, the room remained silent for several minutes as each person processed their own thoughts and emotions about Michael's legacy and the ways his love had continued to shape their family's story. Finally, Tommy's oldest daughter, now 12 years old and named Michelle in honor of her grandfather Michael, raised her hand with the seriousness that the family had come to associate with these annual gatherings. "I understand that Grandpa Michael was brave and that he loved us all very much," Michelle said, her voice carrying the thoughtful tone that suggested she had been considering her words carefully. "But I want to know what we're supposed to do with his message now. How do we use what he taught us to help other people?" The question sparked a conversation that lasted well into the evening, as 3 generations of the O'Brien family discussed how they could honor Michael's memory by sharing the lessons his message had taught them about love, preparation, and family resilience. They talked about the various ways they were already contributing to their communities through their careers and volunteer work, but they also began to envision more coordinated efforts to help other families prepare for and cope with unexpected loss. By the end of that anniversary evening, the O'Brien family had committed to establishing a foundation dedicated to providing resources and support for families dealing with the loss of first responders. The Michael O'Brien Family Preparedness Foundation would offer workshops on legacy planning, crisis communication, and grief recovery, while also providing financial assistance for education and mental health services for surviving family members. "Dad's message saved our family," Tommy said as they concluded their planning discussion. "Now it's our responsibility to help his message save other families too. That's how we keep his love alive and make sure his sacrifice continues to make a difference in the world." The Foundation's first workshop was held on September 11, 2027, exactly 26 years after Michael O'Brien had spoken his final words to his family. The event was attended by first responders and their families from across the tri-state area, all of whom came to learn about the practical and emotional preparation that could help their families survive and thrive, even in the face of unimaginable loss. As Sarah stood at the podium in the community center where the workshop was being held, looking out at an audience filled with firefighters, police officers, EMTs, and their spouses and children, she felt Michael's presence as strongly as she had on any anniversary of his death. His message, which had begun as a desperate attempt to provide guidance during a moment of crisis, had evolved into a legacy of love that continued to protect and strengthen families more than a quarter-century after his voice had first spoken the words that would change everything. "My husband Michael left me a voicemail message on the morning of September 11, 2001, that I initially thought was simply a beautiful goodbye," Sarah told the audience. "But over the past 26 years, I've learned that his message was actually a roadmap for building a life worthy of his sacrifice. Today, I want to share that roadmap with you, so that your families can benefit from the wisdom that love and desperation inspired in a firefighter who had only minutes to say everything that mattered most." As Sarah began to play excerpts from Michael's message and to explain how each piece of guidance had helped her family navigate specific challenges over the years, she could see the recognition in the faces of the first responders in her audience. They understood the dangers of their profession and the importance of preparation, but many of them had never considered the kind of comprehensive, emotional and practical guidance that Michael had managed to provide in his final communication. The workshop continued throughout the day, with Tommy, Emma and Jake each presenting different aspects of family preparedness and recovery. They shared personal stories about how their father's guidance had influenced their major life decisions, helped them avoid exploitation and manipulation, and provided them with the confidence to pursue their dreams despite the early loss of their father. But perhaps most importantly, they demonstrated through their own lives and achievements that families can not only survive the loss of a parent in the line of duty, but can actually thrive and succeed in ways that honor their loved one's memory and sacrifice. Michael O'Brien's final message had not just saved his family from potential problems, it had empowered them to build lives of meaning, service, and love that reflected the values he had died protecting. As the sun set on that September afternoon in 2027, 26 years after Michael O'Brien had spoken his last words to the people he loved most. His voice continued to echo in the hearts and minds of families who were learning to love each other with the same thoughtfulness, preparation, and protective care that had characterized his final message. His sacrifice on September 11th, 2001, had ended his physical presence in the world, but his love had proven to be immortal, continuing to guide and strengthen not just his own family, but countless others who had learned from his example. The firefighter, who had climbed the stairs of the North Tower on that terrible morning, carrying equipment and hope in equal measure, had left behind something more valuable than any material inheritance: the knowledge that true love involves not just emotional expression, but careful preparation for the challenges that the people we care about will face long after we're gone. Michael O'Brien's final message had become a testament to the power of love to transcend death, the importance of clear communication in family relationships, and the ways that thoughtful preparation can protect the people we care about most from the uncertainties and dangers of life. His voice, speaking across more than 2 decades with the same clarity and purpose it had carried on September 11th, 2001, continued to remind everyone who heard it that the greatest gift we can give to the people we love is the knowledge that they are cherished, capable, and equipped to build meaningful lives even in our absence. The last words of firefighter Michael O'Brien had indeed saved his family's life, but their impact had extended far beyond his own household to touch the lives of thousands of other families who had learned from his example of how to love with both the heart and the mind, how to prepare for uncertainty while maintaining hope, and how to ensure that the bonds of family remain strong even when death attempts to break them forever.